Yeah, listen to this. And it came out on Truth Social. President Trump posted. Truth Social, just one moment ago. Iran's military is a complete and total mess. Much of it, like their Navy and their Air Force, does not even exist anymore. They have been completely defeated. Iran is all talk and no action. The bully of the Middle East is dead. They've taken too long to negotiate a deal that would have been great for them. Now they will have to pay the price.
Wow.
By that. Jacqui Heinrich joins us live from the White House with those details. Jacqui.
Yeah, pretty ominous message from the president this morning, guys, and it comes on the heels of new reporting shedding some light on what the substance of the negotiations were before the U.S. was forced to respond to Iran's attack on an American Apache helicopter patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. According to the New York Times, the two sides were working on pretty detailed negotiations related to Iran's nuclear program. 4 big points there. First, a ban on enrichment for somewhere between the U.S. demand of 20 years and the Iranian counteroffer of 10. Also a plan to dilute or downblend Iran's existing stockpile of 11 tons of near bomb-grade fuel. According to this report, it wasn't yet clear whether that would be shipped outside the country or downblended inside Iran, but the U.S. would be the only observer. Third, Iran was in talks to dismantle its 3 major nuclear sites that were severely degraded in Operation Midnight Hammer last year, and they were also discussing the need for snap inspections to ensure compliance. The Times writes, the result is what American officials describe as the hazy outlines of an accord, assuming the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and hardline Iranian politicians do not overrule Iran's chief negotiator, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, or torpedo the much more detailed talks that the United States has proposed to hold in Switzerland this summer. All that was upended after Israel and Iran exchanged fire on Sunday after a U.S. Army Apache gunship was shot off the coast of Oman. Its crew was rescued by an autonomous drone. Senate Democrats now raising the alarm over this.
The U.S. helicopter that went down over the strait is a stark reminder that every second Trump's disastrous war continues is another second that our troops remain in harm's way. Our service members are the best and the bravest in the world, and they deserve better than to risk their lives in a reckless, aimless war. The only sure way to protect our troops is to end this war as soon as possible.
Now, according to another report, the president still believes that a deal is possible and it's right on the horizon. One U.S. official telling Politico nothing changes where the deal stands right now. They also reiterated the U.S. response to Iran's attacks were proportional. But that message on Truth Social from the president this morning, casting a question mark over that with the phrasing too late. So we will look into that and get back to you, guys.
Jacqui, I'm wondering how much of that Truth Social post was about the response that Iran had to our response of them taking down the Apache. So we looked at, they hit multiple bases. It doesn't look like they hit anything right now. We're waiting on Jordan's response, but it looked like Kuwait successfully knocked it down, and Bahrain, they might have been one hit. But maybe he just looked at that and said, okay. And as Mark Montgomery says, maybe it's going to go back to a 400 strike day again.
Could be. And, you know, there's been some debate since all of this flared up over the weekend about whether the ceasefire is holding, what ceasefire actually means at this point. So still unclear whether this is a discussion about the peace talks or if those are still operating on one track while the U.S. response to Iran's attack is operating on another. But we'll be reaching out to White House officials here shortly to get some clarity on that.
Jacqui, it seems like we're back to the original red line from the president, which is anytime there's American blood. Now, we were blessed. Those pilots, we were able to go get them out of the water, but that could have been bad. And I get the sense that the president, that ticked them off.
Yeah, and, you know, he only has one choice in that situation, which is to defend his red line. I mean, the U.S., the president has been pretty tolerant in letting these sort of pinprick attacks that we've seen over the course of this 8 or 9 week ceasefire at this point not derail sort of the broader philosophy that, in fact, you know, it is a ceasefire. A ceasefire in that part of the world, as he said, is when you're shooting more moderately, but insisting that things are still on track and the ceasefire is holding. It sounds to me from reading this and how the U.S. side is framing it that that's how they want to proceed, making sure to reiterate that the U.S. response was proportional to Iran's attack and that the deal is still on track, that the talks are still on track. We heard some reporting this morning from Trey Yanks that some negotiators, I think it was Qatari negotiators, are heading to Tehran to try to resolve the outstanding gaps. And so, you know, with all that moving forward, that said, the president does need to defend his red line that he has insisted is there, which is you attack U.S. troops, and, you know, sort of that's the line there. And that's what the U.S. has done. The Truth Social post this morning, though, it does need a little bit more fleshing out.
You know, what's interesting is, so they shoot down our helicopter, so we fight back by attacking targets in Iran. Then they retaliate against our bases in Jordan, Bahrain, and Kuwait. So now it seems like, based on what happened after the helicopter, he would retaliate. Donald Trump would decide to do something to Iran, an attack. And what's different about this latest Truth Social, he said they've taken too long to negotiate and they will pay the price. It's a shift in focus, right, Jackie? Because in the past, it's been if they don't come to the table, if they don't negotiate, then we will have to basically retaliate. But this one's saying they will pay the price now. It's not a maybe.
Yeah, and we've heard the president say all along that the Iranians are taking too long, and heard U.S. officials explain sort of why that delay exists, just the mechanics of getting an answer from the Iranians with the fractured regime that they have. The other part of that post, though, tells me that, you know, the president is still emphasizing that Iran's military, it has been, in many ways, the conventional apparatus has been obliterated. There are still, as we've heard from U.S. officials, you know, the drones, the types of munitions that are easy to manufacture that will continue to pose a problem, but pointing to the Navy being at the bottom of the sea, as he often points out. And so the question for military analysts is, what would it take to get Iran to believe that they are in a position of defeat so that they can come to the negotiating table in earnest and, you know, agree to some of these things. But as the president and as some of these articles point out, there is a distinction between who the U.S. is negotiating with in the political realm, the foreign minister, for instance, and the IRGC, the Council of Advisors that surround the supreme leader, and just the messaging back and forth between them, and the risk that at any juncture over the course of those negotiations that it falls apart. So the president is expressing some impatience this morning, and, you know, we'll see what that means, guys.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you.
What do you think about him posting this and saying basically, just wait?
Well, I think the president was always going to get to this point.
Yes.
The reality is we were 2 weeks out from finishing a run. There was a lot of public pressure, gas prices. Some of the politicians wanted to talk about the midterms. Some staffers wanted to talk about the midterms. And so the president left some targets that they already had to get a deal. He left some of the leaders because he thought he could negotiate with them. These people have not acted in good faith. And when they attacked the helicopter, that was it for the president. And they still don't want to negotiate. So I think we will begin those operations again, and those targets that were already on the table before.
You know, what's interesting now is there's been mass hangings there of the people that rose up in January and February. But now, if this starts again, they have the internet. So they're able to interact and maybe work with and give intelligence to us in real time, because of the 90 million, they say, of the 90 million in Iran, 88 million, maybe 89, hate this regime. Mm-hmm. And for those people who say, well, they're fanatics. The Japanese were fanatics.
Right.
The Nazis are fanatics.
Right.
Think about what they represented. Mark Montgomery was on with us a while earlier and said, you know, politically, the president does not want to have to do it, but he thinks we're going in this direction. Watch.
At some point, this is going to probably escalate back up to a full scale, like 400 strike day in the near future. If this back and forth keeps going, at some point you can't just keep doing proportionate strikes back and forth. If they continue to reach out and try to hit ships that are transiting through the southern scheme, which is what was going on last week, or they strike at our allied partners' bases, you know, in the Middle East, Kuwait, Bahrain, ones that are much harder to defend because of their proximity than, say, Jordan, where we have a lot of warning. If that continues, at some point the president's going to have to do real cost imposition on him and what's called a disproportionate or escalatory strike. But I think the president's trying hard not to do that.
I would say one last thing, because there's going to be a lot of talk after the president just released this. Who stopped the deal, right? And this past week, you've seen a lot of people talk that Israel is the one who's stopping the deal because of their fight with a terrorist organization, not Lebanon, but Hezbollah, that is based in there. They're sponsored by the terrorists in Iran. You know now who stopped the deal. It's the IRGC who fired on our people. Those are the people that got in the way of the deal. The president continued to extend an olive branch, but if you're firing on our people, he has no choice now. So the BB fight and all of this, which is captured headlines, that's irrelevant now.
You hear a lot of people say he just needs to finish it. Like if we were really 2 weeks away from finishing the job and Iran continues, if they say ceasefire, we're going to negotiate. Oh, no, we're not. They never come to the table. They can't even get along, the leadership. So we're watching them attack Israel. Then Israel has to retaliate. They attacked our helicopter. We have to fight back. Then they're attacking our bases in the Middle East. We can't sit back and just watch them do that.
Yeah, and by the way, Israel's not attacking Lebanon. They're attacking Hezbollah, which is the cancer inside Lebanon that Lebanon would love that cancer to be
eradicated,
disappear.
Yep.
So the thing that is taking place now is that the President of the United States is going to be looking at the 2 weeks' worth of targets probably, and unless they rise up, he must have been picking up intelligence that shows they were no longer negotiating. So he said, okay, you're not going to negotiate. You're not convinced that the 13,000 plus strikes that we had and the 8,000 plus strikes that Israel have degraded you to the point where you're still saying that you're going to be the beast of the Middle East. That's not going to happen. So now we're going to see, because one thing they've done over the last few weeks, 8-9 weeks, is they brought their launchers out. They're digging them out. You know what they are now? Targets.
Yeah.
So now we're seeing how they react and what they've done and what the damage is done. We've been going to school with their satellites on what they still have.
Right.
And now we've actually brought more firepower, more sophisticated firepower to the area. And you don't think that Israel knows exactly where the new leadership is? They do.
Well, they've been watching them, and we know many of the new leadership, and the president spoke to this. He decided not to eliminate them, to negotiate with them. Well, now that they don't want to negotiate, I guarantee you they're back on that list that would be disseminated to the intelligence community. The last thing I'll say about this, Johnny Ratcliffe, who is probably one of the best CIA directors we ever had, they know these guys' movement. Working with the Mossad on a day-to-day basis, they have been standing by just waiting for the president's orders. And it looks like they're going to probably get it pretty soon.
Well, we know that they were able to do that. Israel has the intelligence to do that. They took out the Ayatollah and a lot of his family.
Right, and they didn't take out the rest of the people. They picked out the part of the building where the leadership was. They went out of their way not to blow up the other part of the building.
Which is how precise they are.
Yeah, which was actually talked about by the foreign minister to a friendly press interview that he had over the weekend. And they must know, we know exactly where they are. The other thing they didn't do, 8 weeks ago, they said there's going to be a ceasefire. They're going to open up the strait. There was a ceasefire. They never opened up the strait.
Right.
So right there, you're in violation, let alone what they've done.
They didn't open up the strait. Then we caught them mining the strait again.
Yeah.
So every part of this negotiation, they say something publicly and then they do something different.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.